Welcome back to McCarthy Performance. We're finishing up on the 383, waiting for the push rods to show up. What we're doing right now is we're checking to make sure that the intake fits properly on the engine. What I have is I have some gasket material. And what I do is I put the bolts in the intake on the corners, and I put the gasket material on the four corners. You can see it here, here, and we'll move you over here. You can see that I have it down here and here. What that does is that allows me to check the gasket and make sure that nothing bottoms out. Places to look for things to bottom out. You want air clearance here. You want to make sure that when your gaskets are on four corners that your bolt holes aren't rubbing on the threads. That'll cause the intake not to set down and seal. Lack of clearance here will cause the intake not to sit all the way down and seal. So that's important. And we're looking down the holes, and my bolts go in and out very easily, so I know that it's not going to bind. I have enough air gap here that it's going to sit down and it's going to seal properly. I'm looking at the angles. Not too much of a problem on new stuff. Usually it's pretty close. It looks good, so I know that the heads haven't been rolled or nobody's cut the intake at a different angle. Something you always want to check. I've scribed lightly around here. Well, you can scribe lightly around there, but what I did was is I've got a pencil and I went around the ports lightly with the intake setting where it's going to be setting. And now I will take the intake off and I'll hold the gaskets up to make sure that I have enough sealing surface from here to here and that everything looks like where the gasket will be positioned will be okay. And I'll set the gaskets on the engine here in a second once I get the intake off. So I've scribed a line where the intake sets with the shims underneath the intake. We've got plenty of material here. The intake isn't going to be a problem sealing up. Now this intake port on this head is bigger than the intake. There's not a lot of gain here to cut this out. If you look, we get kind of thin here. It's getting kind of scary right there. I can recheck this, but I'm going to try to find a smaller gasket than what we have here. This gasket is a little bit bigger than I'd like. This gasket, factory gasket's a little smaller than I'd like. So somewhere in the middle, hopefully. And if you've got one of these, and I don't know if you can buy one on eBay or not, this might help. This is an older one. Usually I just take the dimensions and write them down. This would be the ideal dimensions that we'd like to see. And then I'll go into Motor State here, catalog, and I'll look it up and I'll see if I can find one. Seeing how I used my shims, if you got a old intake gasket or something, I just gasket material. I know what size this is. So, and I know the intake fits good. So I won't need a 1/8" gasket to make it seal, and I don't need to move the port around. The port centering is pretty good. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to see if I can find a gasket in here, and we'll look it up and we'll go from there. And that's how I do it. So the gasket the customer brought was a 1207. It's a little bit thin up where the sealing area is for the intake to seal up properly. So we're going to move up to the 1206 Velcro. Edelbrock makes a gasket. 7201. Hopefully, maybe I can find one of them in town so I don't have to order it. But it's a little bit closer to the ports that I'd like to have, the gasket set on. I was able to get some Edelbrock gaskets in town, luckily. So if you look at the 1207, you can see that we have just a little bit more gasket area for sealing up here with the Edelbrock. And I'm more than happy with that. We're going to put the Edelbrocks on the heads so they won't shift around. I'll spray a little 3M trim adhesive on here, and we'll bond them onto the heads, and hopefully the push rods will show up and we can put a fork in this and call it a done deal. This is what I usually use for gaskets, to stick them, to hold them down. So we're going to put a light coat of that on the gasket. And there's no pits or voids in these heads, they're new, so there should be no reason why we need any more than that. What I do is I've got some flange nuts. I've got these from McMaster Car. They have no serrations on them. So what I'll do is I'll put these on, and I'll move the gaskets so the ports line up good, and it'll put a little bit of pressure on these, and I push down on them, tap them down, make sure that they're all seated down on the head good. And that way they won't shift on me, and I'll be able to get the bolt holes clean through and, be able to thread them without having a problem. There's nothing worse than having the gasket slip while you're trying to put the intake gaskets on, and that's normally how I do it. If the head has got some erosion around it, I'll put a bead of silicone, but like I said, these are new, so we don't have to worry about that, and I just take my finger and wipe the excess off there. This is a push rod brush. It's starting to get wore out. I got to get another one, but this is what I normally do to the push rods. You'd be surprised how much junk you can get out of them. So we're gonna scrub them, and I usually put them on the end of the solvent hose and flush them. Run them through a couple more times. rocker arms are all washed. Comp puts some assembly grease in them. I usually like to wash it out. But, you know, that's not the hard, fast rule. That's just what I do. You know, and out of a little bit of solvent there. And I think my pump just died on me. There. But you can see there's a lot of black. I don't know if it's oxide, black oxide, or what that coating is that they put on here. But it seems to be an awful lot of that in them tubes. So I brush them out. Some push rods are better than others. Of course, used push rods are horrible. If they're in good shape, I'll run them through the hot tank, but a lot of times they get replaced because they're wore out. But we'll get the push rods in it, and then we'll put the intake down, and then it'll be a done deal. Yeah, you're gonna sit here and watch all of this. Putting the rockers on this side, you might have seen me before I do any adjusting on the valves. I always look down the ports or blow the ports out to make sure that nothing's in there, because the valves aren't open, but they will be now. So I'm going to do these on this side, and then I'm going to put air into the number one position through the spark plug hole, and we'll put the two springs back on. I've checked piston to valve clearance. We've got plenty of piston to valve clearance. I intentionally left out how I do my geometry on my rock arms for my push rod length. There's a lot of people that have done it on the internet. I don't want to add to it. I don't want controversy. I've done it this way. It works for me this way. You know, I do T&Ds and Justles a little different, but I'm going to keep doing it this way. I don't really want to have a bunch of conversations about it, and I know that's maybe a subject that it seems like a lot of people have covered on the internet. I don't particularly care to want to cover it, so I'm not going to. Maybe. I think there's a couple videos that I've touched on it lightly, and that's about as far as I want to go with it. So we'll get these adjusted. I'll put air into this one. I'll get the springs on it. We'll do that one. I just want to get these rocker arms on here right now and make sure the push rods are in the cups on the lifters, and they are, and that's where we're going to be. And I'll put some air into this cylinder and we'll get going on that. All right, give her a once over, look everything over, check everything, make sure everything looks good and there's nothing, no dirt or any pieces of material that are foreign laying in gaskets or any of that crap. Okay, it looks like from what I can see, everything looks good. Push rods look good, everything just the way it should. So time to put the lid on her. The outside ones aren't wet, but I'll put a little silicone on them anyways, keep the moisture out of there. Usually the reduced flange bolts from ARP usually go in by the water neck, and if it's got an exhaust crossover in it, sometimes they go in there. But with this intake, probably don't really matter. Looks like we can use all the large flange bolts that they supplied, although they're not all large flange. You want to put all the intake bolts in before you tighten them. And you definitely want to put some sealer on them, unless you want oil leaks. I'll tighten the intake down a little bit today, and then I'll let it set overnight, and then I'll tighten it up all the way. And then usually after the engine's been run, it's a good idea to check them all, because everything's aluminum. It moves a little. You also want to be aware of your engagement too. You don't want it crashing into any push rods, although I don't think on the small block it's much of a problem, but on some engines you want to make sure that you're not going into the push rod cavity and disturbing the push rod. Everything looks good. This will start putting the fasteners on this side. So we'll call this probably good. We'll put a few more in and have to juggle around with a couple, it looks like. Well, I'll move a few of these around and we'll get back and we'll finish the job up. Well, this is it on the 383. Yeah, there's a little box mark there when it was rubbing in the box. I'm going to see if I can get that off with a little lacquer thinner. I didn't spray this one lightly with silver. Usually I do that, but I didn't on this one. Um, I put 2 beads on the intake, and I put 2 beads on the block, the China wall. So we got her pretty much good where I like to see it. I don't like a lot of crap hanging out. Sometimes if you get too close to that, you can just kind of wet your finger a little bit after it sets up, and you just give it a poke like that. And yeah, I think this is going to do it on this video. Thank you for watching.